The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. In the dim light of a Northeast Portland kitchen, Marcus Brennan sat with his hands wrapped around a glass that held more than whiskey. It held the weight of broken promises, the ghost of who he used to be, and the last thread connecting him to the family sleeping upstairs. This is a story about a man who had everything and traded it all for something that fit in a bottle. But more than that, it's about the moment when falling becomes flying, when rock bottom becomes the foundation you build your life upon. Marcus wasn't always this way. 5 years earlier, he'd been the guy neighbors waved to, the father coaching Little League on Saturday mornings, the husband who still brought flowers home on Fridays. He worked as a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm in the Pearl District, pulled decent money, and had a laugh that made people want to be around him. But somewhere between the promotions and the pressure, between the long hours and the longer silences, alcohol stopped being something he enjoyed and became something he needed. It crept in like the Portland fog, slow and silent, until one day he couldn't see his way out. The thing about addiction is it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't kick down your door and declare war. It whispers. It tells you that one more drink will take the edge off, that you deserve it after the day you've had, that you're still in control because you can stop anytime you want. Marcus believed those whispers for longer than he should have. His wife, Catherine, noticed first. The way he'd pour a drink before dinner became 2 drinks during dinner, then 3 after. The way his eyes glazed over during conversations with their kids, Lily and James. The way he stopped being present even when he was sitting right there. She tried talking to him, then pleading, then threatening. Nothing stuck. The alcohol had him, and it wasn't letting go. Tonight was different, though Marcus didn't know it yet. Tonight, something inside him had finally cracked. Not broken, but cracked open, letting a sliver of light pierce through years of darkness. Upstairs, his 7-year-old daughter had asked her mother a question that shattered Catherine's heart. Why doesn't Daddy love us anymore? Marcus had heard it through the floorboards, and for the first time in months, he felt something other than numbness. He felt shame, deep, burning shame that no amount of whiskey could drown. He stared at the amber liquid in his glass and wondered when exactly he'd become a stranger to the people who needed him most. When had the man in the mirror turned into someone his own children feared? What you're about to witness is the unraveling and rebuilding of a human soul. It's the story of how Marcus Brennan lost himself in the bottom of a bottle and found redemption in the most unlikely place, the wreckage of his own making. This isn't a fairy tale. Recovery doesn't work that way. But it is proof that no fall is too far, no mistake too permanent, no man too broken to be made whole again. By the end, you'll understand that sometimes the only way out is through, and that the darkest nights produce the brightest mornings. The question is, what would you do if you woke up one day and realized you'd become the villain in your own family's story? The promises started stacking up like empty bottles in a recycling bin. "I'll cut back," Marcus told Catherine one Tuesday morning in March, standing in their Laurelhurst bungalow kitchen, coffee going cold on the counter. She'd found him passed out on the couch again, work clothes still on, shoes tracking mud across the carpet. Her eyes were red, but not from crying anymore. She'd moved past tears into something harder, something that looked a lot like resignation. "I mean it this time," he said, and maybe he did. In that moment, with morning light filtering through the Douglas firs outside and guilt sitting heavy in his chest, he probably believed his own words. That's the cruelest trick addiction plays. It lets you believe you're still the one in control. For 3 days, Marcus kept his word. He came home after work, kissed Catherine on the cheek, played Legos with James, helped Lily with her homework. He felt the itch constantly, that crawling need under his skin, but he white-knuckled through it. Catherine started to soften, started to look at him the way she used to, like he was her partner instead of her problem. On Friday night, they ordered pizza and watched a movie as a family, all 4 of them squeezed onto the couch. James fell asleep against Marcus's shoulder, and Lily laughed at the funny parts. And for a few hours, Marcus remembered what happiness felt like. But beneath it all, the craving hummed like a power line in a storm, waiting for the right moment to strike. The right moment came on Saturday. Marcus had promised to take the kids to Oaks Amusement Park, but he woke up with anxiety thrumming through his veins, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for his phone. A text from his boss. Budget cuts were coming, and his project was under review. Nothing definite, just enough uncertainty to crack the fragile sobriety he'd been holding together with string and willpower. Just one drink, he thought, just to steady my nerves. He told Catherine he needed to run to the hardware store first, grabbed his keys, and drove to the Plaid Pantry on 82nd Avenue where nobody knew his name. He bought a pint of whiskey and sat in his truck in the parking lot, rain drumming on the roof. The first sip burned. The second went down easier. By the time he got home 2 hours later, the bottle was empty, and the promises he'd made were ashes. Catherine took one look at his eyes and knew. She didn't yell this time. She just picked up her phone and called her sister, asking if she and the kids could stay there for the night. Lily stood at the top of the stairs in her yellow raincoat, ready for the amusement park that would never happen. And Marcus saw something flicker across her face that gutted him more than any accusation could. Disappointment. Not surprise. Not even anger. Just the quiet, devastating realization that her father was someone she couldn't count on anymore. That night, alone in the house with the silence pressing down like a physical weight, Marcus sat in the garage and tried to remember the last time James had asked him to play catch. He couldn't. Somewhere along the way, his son had stopped asking, had learned that Dad was unreliable, that the bottle was more important than batting practice. Marcus opened another drink, telling himself it would be the last, knowing it wouldn't be. The garage smelled like motor oil and failure, and when he finally stumbled inside at 2 in the morning, he found a note from Catherine on the kitchen table. "We can't keep doing this. You have to choose." But the problem was, he'd already chosen over and over, and every time he chose wrong. How do you fight an enemy that lives inside your own skull, that speaks with your voice and knows every weakness you have? And how many chances does a man get before the people he loves stop offering them? The phone call came on a Wednesday morning in April, delivered by his supervisor's assistant with the kind of rehearsed politeness that only accompanies bad news. Marcus was being let go, effective immediately. They dressed it up in corporate language, budget constraints and restructuring, but the real reason hung unspoken between every carefully chosen word. He'd become a liability. 3 missed deadlines in 2 months, 2 incidents where he'd shown up to site meetings with alcohol on his breath, and 1 spectacular disaster where he'd confused project specs and cost the company $70,000 in materials. "We wish you the best," the assistant said, and Marcus almost laughed. The best had happened years ago, and he'd drunk it away 1 glass at a time. He drove home in the middle of the day, his work laptop and a cardboard box of desk belongings sitting in the passenger seat like evidence of a crime. The house was empty. Catherine had taken the kids to her mother's place in Beaverton a week earlier, saying they needed some time apart, which was code for, "I can't watch you destroy yourself anymore." The rooms echoed. Marcus set the box on the kitchen table and stared at it. At the coffee mug James had made him in art class. At the framed photo of their family from last summer at Cannon Beach. Everyone smiling like they meant it. He didn't recognize the man in that photo anymore. The afternoon dissolved into evening, and evening dissolved into the kind of drinking that's not about pleasure, but obliteration. Marcus sat on the back porch, watching rain pool in the yard, bottle after bottle disappearing as the sky darkened. His phone buzzed with texts from Catherine. "We need to talk about next steps. The kids are asking about you. Marcus, please call me." He ignored them all. What could he say? That he'd lost his job? That he was sitting in their house drinking away the severance pay that was supposed to tide them over? That every time he tried to imagine a future, all he saw was more of this, an endless gray expanse of days bleeding into nights, all of them tasting like regret and cheap whiskey? Somewhere around midnight, Marcus made his way upstairs to James's room and sat on the small bed surrounded by superhero posters and Lego creations. He picked up his son's favorite stuffed animal, a worn rabbit named Mr. Hops that James had slept with since he was 2. The weight of what he'd become crashed over him then, a wave so powerful it knocked the breath from his lungs. "I'm supposed to be his hero," he thought. And instead, I'm the monster under the bed. He tried to cry, but the alcohol had numbed even that, leaving him hollow and aching in a way that went beyond physical pain. This was soul deep, the kind of hurt that comes from knowing you failed the people who needed you most. When Catherine came by the next morning to pick up some of the kids' things, she found Marcus passed out on the living room floor, surrounded by empty bottles. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, keys still in her hand, and Marcus saw something in her face that was worse than anger or disappointment: pity. She'd stopped seeing him as her husband and started seeing him as a problem to be managed, a tragedy in progress. "I'm filing for separation," she said quietly, not looking at him directly. "The lawyer will send papers next week. You can stay in the house until we figure out what to do with it." She grabbed a garbage bag of clothes and toys and walked out. The front door closed with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid, and Marcus was alone with the wreckage of his life, wondering how many more things he could lose before there was nothing left to take. And in the stillness that followed, one thought emerged crystal clear through the fog of his hangover. If he didn't stop now, he wouldn't survive to see Christmas. But stopping meant facing everything he'd been running from. And that seemed impossible, didn't it? The accident happened on a rainy Thursday in May, the kind of Portland downpour that turns streets into rivers and makes the whole world gray. Marcus had been driving back from a liquor store on Burnside, 3 sheets to the wind and operating on instinct rather than sense. He didn't see the stoplight change, didn't see the sedan with a young mother and her daughter in car seats, until his truck was already skidding through the intersection. Time stretched out, each second lasting an eternity, and in that expanded moment, Marcus saw his entire life flash before him. Not the highlight reel, but the truth. Every missed recital, every broken promise, every moment he chose the bottle over the people who loved him. The 2 vehicles missed each other by inches, his truck slamming into a telephone pole instead, the impact shattering his windshield and deploying the airbag with a sound like a gunshot. He sat in the wreckage, bleeding from a cut above his eye, ears ringing, and watched the sedan's brake lights disappear down the street. The mother had swerved, had saved both their lives through quick reflexes and luck. But Marcus had seen her face in that split second before impact. Terror, pure and absolute, the kind of fear that haunts you long after the danger passes. He could have killed them. He could have taken a mother from her child, a child from her mother, all because he couldn't go 2 hours without a drink. The police arrived, then the ambulance, and through it all, Marcus sat in the rain-soaked driver's seat and felt something inside him finally, irrevocably break. They took him to Providence Portland Medical Center, stitched up his forehead, checked for concussion. His blood alcohol level was 0.19, more than twice the legal limit. The officer who took his statement was professional but cold, explaining that he'd be charged with DUI, that his license would be suspended, that he was lucky no one was hurt. "You need help, man," the officer said before leaving, and it wasn't said with judgment, just a kind of weary recognition, like he'd seen this story play out 100 times before and knew how it usually ended. Marcus was released into Catherine's custody because he'd listed her as his emergency contact and hadn't bothered to change it. She didn't say a word during the drive home, just gripped the steering wheel and stared straight ahead, jaw tight with an emotion Marcus couldn't name. That night, Catherine left him at the house with a single statement: "I can't save you. Only you can do that." Then she was gone again, back to her mother's, back to the kids who asked about Daddy, but in the past tense, like he was already a memory. Marcus stood in the living room, still wearing the hospital scrubs they'd given him after cutting off his blood-soaked shirt, and looked at his reflection in the dark TV screen. He was 42 years old and looked 60. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow. The face of a man who'd given up on himself long before anyone else gave up on him. "This is who you are now," he thought. "This is what you've become." But another thought followed, quieter but more insistent. "This doesn't have to be who you are tomorrow." He walked to the kitchen, opened the cabinet where he kept his bottles, and pulled them out one by one. Whiskey, vodka, the expensive bourbon he'd been saving for a special occasion that would never come. He stood at the sink, rain still hammering against the windows, and poured them out. The smell filled the kitchen, sharp and familiar, and his hands shook with the urge to stop, to save just one, to give himself an out. But he didn't. He poured until the bottles were empty, until the sink ran clear, until nothing remained except the memory of what they'd taken from him. Then he fell to his knees on the tile floor and said out loud, to the empty house and to whatever God might be listening, "I'm done. Help me be done." It wasn't a prayer exactly, more like a white flag, A surrender to the truth he'd been denying for years. He couldn't do this alone, and if he kept trying, it was going to kill him. The question was whether he'd already burned too many bridges, whether redemption was even possible for someone who'd fallen this far. Could a man who'd lost everything find a reason to start over? The first 72 hours of sobriety felt like dying slowly. Marcus locked himself in the house, unplugged the TV, silenced his phone, and endured. The withdrawal came in waves, tremors that made his hands useless, sweats that soaked through his sheets, nausea that had him curled around the toilet at 3 in the morning. But worse than the physical symptoms were the mental ones. The anxiety that felt like his skin was too tight. The depression that pressed down like a lead blanket. The voice in his head that kept whispering how easy it would be to make it all stop. How one drink wouldn't hurt. How he'd earned a reprieve from this suffering. Just get through today, he told himself hour after hour. Just survive until tomorrow. On day 4, Marcus forced himself out of the house. He'd found a flyer for Alcoholics Anonymous meetings at a community center in southeast Portland near the Hawthorne district. The meeting was held in a church basement that smelled like coffee and old books, populated by 15 strangers sitting in a circle of metal folding chairs. Marcus almost turned around 3 times before finally walking through the door. He took a seat in the back, arms crossed, jaw clenched, radiating every defense mechanism he had. A woman named Patricia led the meeting, somewhere in her 50s, with kind eyes and a voice that had clearly told hard truths before. "We share our stories here," she explained. "No judgment, no advice unless asked for, just honesty." When it was Marcus's turn, he said 5 words. "My name is Marcus, alcoholic." Saying it out loud, claiming that identity in front of strangers, was both humiliating and somehow relieving. Like lancing a wound that had been festering for years. He kept going back. Every night at 7, Marcus sat in that circle and listened to stories that mirrored his own. The slow descent, the broken promises, the moment of clarity that came too late or just in time. He heard about people who'd lost more than jobs and families, who'd lost years to prison, who'd destroyed their health beyond repair. But he also heard about recovery, about people who'd strung together days into weeks into months, who'd rebuilt their lives from less than nothing. A man named Terrence, 6 years sober, became something like a mentor. He ran a small landscaping business and had a laugh that came easy despite the hard road behind him. "First year's the hardest," Terrence told him over coffee after a meeting. "Your brain's rewiring itself, remembering how to feel things without numbing them. It gets better, but you gotta want it more than you want the drink." Marcus found work where he could, day labor jobs, helping a friend's brother with home repairs, anything that paid cash and didn't require references he couldn't provide. The jobs were humbling. He spent his days hauling lumber, mixing concrete, doing the grunt work he'd supervised others doing when he had his project management position. But there was something honest about the physical exhaustion, the way his body ached at the end of the day from work instead of alcohol. He lived lean, ate ramen and peanut butter sandwiches, put every spare dollar into a savings account at Umpqua Bank. The separation papers from Catherine arrived in June. He signed them without contest, understanding he'd forfeited the right to fight for a marriage he'd already abandoned. At night, alone in the house that felt too big and too quiet, Marcus kept a journal like Patricia had suggested. He wrote about the cravings, about the shame, about the small victories like making it through a whole day without thinking about drinking. He wrote letters to his kids that he never sent, apologies that felt inadequate but necessary to put into words. "Dear Lily, I'm sorry I wasn't there for your science fair. Dear James, I'm sorry I taught you that promises are disposable." Writing them hurt, but it was a different kind of hurt than the drinking had been. This pain meant something, was pointing him somewhere instead of just drowning him. 3 months sober, Marcus ran into Catherine at a New Seasons grocery store in Selwood. She was buying strawberries, and he was buying coffee, and for a moment they just stared at each other across the produce section. She looked tired but somehow lighter, like a weight had been lifted. "You look different," she said carefully. "I'm trying," he replied, and meant it with every cell of his body. They didn't hug, didn't make promises about reconciliation, but she didn't walk away immediately either. And in that small moment of not walking away, Marcus found something that felt like hope. Was he changing fast enough? And would change be enough to repair what he'd shattered? If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way you won't miss the next one. And if you'd like to support the channel, you can even buy me a coffee on Ko-fi. Every little bit helps keep these stories alive. Now, let's get back to it. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the promise of rain. Marcus was 6 months sober, and the world had started to come back into focus. Colors seemed brighter, sounds clearer, like he'd been living underwater and finally broke the surface. He was working steady now, part of Terrence's landscaping crew, doing yard maintenance for homes in West Lynn and Lake Oswego. The work was good, honest, required him to show up on time and follow through on commitments. Small things, but they mattered. He'd regained 20 pounds, the gaunt look replaced by something healthier. At night, he still attended meetings, still fought the occasional craving that would hit him out of nowhere, triggered by a song on the radio or the smell of cedar that reminded him of his father's workshop. But the spaces between cravings were getting longer, the grip of addiction loosening day by day. On a Saturday afternoon, Marcus was at Laurelhurst Park, helping Terrence's crew clear storm debris from the walking paths. He was hauling branches to the truck when he saw them, Catherine, Lily, and James at the playground. His heart stopped. James was on the swings, pumping his legs to go higher, and Lily was navigating the monkey bars with the fierce determination she applied to everything. Catherine sat on a bench, watching them with the kind of protective attention mothers develop, alert even while relaxed. Marcus froze, unsure whether to approach or quietly leave before they noticed him. The decision was made for him when James looked up and saw his father standing 50 feet away, work gloves in hand, frozen like a deer. "Dad?" James called out, his voice uncertain, like he was asking a question instead of stating a fact. Lily's head snapped around, and in her face Marcus saw a war between hope and caution. Catherine stood slowly, her hand moving to her phone instinctively, as if preparing to call for backup. But she didn't stop the kids when James climbed off the swing and started walking toward Marcus. The boy approached slowly, each step measured, and Marcus knelt down to be at his level. Up close, he could see how much James had grown in the months they'd been apart, could see the haircut was new, the shoes unfamiliar. "I've missed so much," Marcus thought, the realization cutting deep. "Hey, buddy," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion he was trying to keep in check. James stood just out of reach, studying his father like you'd study a stray dog, trying to determine if it was safe or would bite. "You working?" the boy asked, nodding toward the landscaping truck. "Yeah," Marcus replied, helping clean up the park. Lily had joined her brother now, standing slightly behind him, her hand on his shoulder. "Mom said you were sick," she said, and there was no accusation in it, just a simple statement of fact. "I was," Marcus admitted. "I'm getting better." Catherine approached then, and Marcus stood, respecting the distance she maintained. "We should go," she said to the kids, but her tone wasn't panicked or angry, just careful. Before they left, Lily turned back. "Are you going to be here next Saturday?" she asked. Marcus glanced at Catherine, seeking permission he knew he didn't deserve. She studied him for a long moment, and he could see her weighing risks, measuring the man before her against the ghost of the man he'd been. Finally, she gave the smallest nod. "I'll be here," Marcus promised. And this time, he meant it in a way that went deeper than words. He watched them walk away, watched James glance back twice, watched Lily skip ahead holding her mother's hand. That night at his meeting, Marcus shared the encounter, his voice breaking when he described the way his son had looked at him, like he was trying to remember someone he used to know. Patricia smiled. "That's the beginning," she said. "Not of fixing everything, just of showing up." But was showing up enough after years of absence? Could his children learn to trust him again? Or had he burned that bridge beyond repair? And how many Saturdays would it take before they stopped looking at him like a stranger? The Saturdays became a rhythm. Marcus would finish his morning landscaping work, clean up, and drive to Laurelhurst Park by 2 o'clock. Sometimes Catherine stayed. Sometimes she'd drop the kids off and run errands, gradually testing his reliability like you'd test ice before walking across a frozen pond. Marcus never pushed. He let them set the pace, content to throw a football with James, push Lily on the swings, sit on park benches and answer their questions about where he'd been and what he'd been doing. He never lied, but he kept his answers age-appropriate, telling them he'd been sick and was working hard to get healthy, that sometimes grown-ups made mistakes and had to spend time fixing them. By November, the trust had grown enough that Catherine agreed to let Marcus take the kids for a few hours. He picked them up on a Sunday morning and drove them to the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry. They wandered through exhibits on space and submarines, and Marcus watched his children with the kind of acute attention that comes from having lost something precious. He noticed that James had developed a stutter when he got excited, that Lily was reading 2 grade levels above her age, that both of them were more cautious than he remembered, like the trauma of his addiction had taught them to be careful with hope. At the planetarium show, James fell asleep against his shoulder, and Marcus felt a lump form in his throat at the simple trust of that gesture. They got pizza afterward at Sizzle Pie on Burnside, and over slices that were too big and drinks that were too cold, Lily asked the question Marcus had been dreading. "Are you and Mom going to get back together?" He looked at Catherine, who joined them for dinner, and saw his own uncertainty reflected in her eyes. "I don't know, sweetheart," he answered honestly. "Your mom and I are figuring things out. But what I do know is I love you both more than anything, and I'm not going anywhere again." It wasn't the answer Lily wanted. He could see the disappointment flicker across her face. But it was the truth, and after years of lies, truth was all he had to offer. Marcus had started attending a second meeting, one specifically for parents trying to regain custody or rebuild relationships with their kids. He heard stories that made his own seem manageable. Fathers who hadn't seen their children in years, mothers fighting through bureaucracies and court systems just for supervised visits. He learned that rebuilding trust was like rebuilding a house after a fire. You couldn't just paint over the damage and pretend it hadn't happened. You had to clear the wreckage, inspect the foundation, and build again from the ground up, one careful piece at a time. He learned patience, something the drinking had stolen from him years ago. In December, Terrence offered Marcus a full-time position, not just as crew, but helping run jobs, estimating bids, managing client relationships. "You've got skills I can use," Terrence said, "and you show up. That's rarer than you'd think." The pay was decent, not what Marcus had made before, but honest money that came from honest work. He moved out of the big house in Laurelhurst, which was being sold as part of the separation, and into a small apartment in the Jade district. 2 bedrooms, so the kids could have their own space when they visited. He furnished it slowly. Beds from Goodwill, dishes from the Dollar Tree, everything secondhand but clean. He painted Lily's room purple and James's room blue, letting them pick the colors, giving them ownership of this new space in his new life. Christmas morning, Marcus woke up alone in his apartment but drove to Catherine's mother's house in Beaverton, where the kids were staying. He'd asked permission, and Catherine had granted it, letting him join for breakfast and present opening. He'd saved for months to buy thoughtful gifts, a telescope for Lily, who'd fallen in love with astronomy, a batting cage membership for James, who'd joined a baseball team. He watched them open the packages, watched their faces light up, and felt a joy so acute it was almost painful. Later, after the kids had gone outside to play in the rare Portland snow, Catherine pulled him aside. "You're doing the work," she said quietly. "I see it. They see it." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "I'm not ready to say we're okay, Marcus. I don't know if we'll ever be what we were, but I'm willing to see where this goes." It wasn't a promise of reconciliation, but it wasn't a closed door either, and Marcus would take that. He would take any opening that led back toward his family, because he'd learned the hard way that love wasn't just a feeling. It was a choice you made every single day, and he was finally making the right one. But how long could he sustain this progress? And what would happen when the first real crisis tested his sobriety? 2 years sober, Marcus marked the anniversary at his Tuesday night meeting, accepting the 2-year chip from Patricia while the group applauded. It was a simple token, no bigger than a poker chip, but it represented 730 days of choosing differently, of fighting the hardest battle of his life and winning one day at a time. The journey hadn't been linear. There had been close calls, moments where the craving hit him like a freight train, and he'd had to call Terrence at 2 in the morning just to talk him down. There had been a night 6 months in where he'd bought a bottle, held it in his hands in the liquor store parking lot for 20 minutes, then walked back inside and returned it. But he'd stayed sober, and in that sobriety, he'd begun to rebuild not just his life, but himself. The landscaping business was thriving. Terrence had made Marcus a partner, recognizing his skill at managing jobs and client relationships. They'd expanded to a crew of 8, taken on commercial properties, built a reputation for quality and reliability. Marcus found purpose in the work, satisfaction in transforming neglected yards into something beautiful. He'd also started volunteering at a treatment center in Gresham, sharing his story with newly sober men and women who were where he'd been 2 years ago. The secret, he'd tell them, is you don't have to believe you can stay sober forever. You just have to believe you can stay sober today. It was advice Terrence had given him, passed down like a torch. And now Marcus was passing it forward. His relationship with his kids had deepened into something real again. They spent every other weekend with him now, plus Wednesday dinners. James had started opening up about school, about the kids who teased him for his stutter, about his dreams of playing college baseball. Lily had developed an interest in environmental science, inspired partly by watching Marcus work with plants and soil, partly by her own fierce intelligence. They'd gone camping together that summer at Silver Falls State Park, just the 3 of them, and Marcus had taught them to fish and identify bird calls. At night, sitting around a campfire, James had said, "I'm glad you're better, Dad," and Marcus had pulled him close, understanding that forgiveness from a child was both easier and harder to earn than from an adult. Kids were resilient, but they also remembered everything. Catherine had softened over the months. They weren't living together, weren't technically together at all, but there was a growing friendship, a tentative rekindling of the partnership they'd once had. They co-parented well, communicated about the kids' needs, even shared the occasional coffee when dropping off or picking up. In March, she'd invited him to her place for dinner, the first time he'd been inside her new townhouse near Orenco Station. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. Over pasta and salad, they'd talked about the past with more honesty than they'd managed in years. "I was so angry at you," she admitted, "but I was also angry at myself for staying as long as I did, for letting the kids see what they saw." Marcus had nodded, accepting the truth of it. "I can't change what I did," he said. "I can only be different now, and keep being different tomorrow." In his apartment, Marcus kept one thing from his drinking days, an empty whiskey bottle. Not hidden away, but displayed on a shelf in his office space, a small room where he did paperwork for the business and wrote in his journal. The bottle sat there like a monument, a reminder of what he'd traded for sobriety and what sobriety had given him back. He'd label it in his mind as the price of my peace, understanding that some scars needed to stay visible so you never forgot the wound. The kids had asked about it once. "Why do you keep that, Dad?" Lily had questioned, curious and concerned. "Because it reminds me who I don't want to be," Marcus had explained, "and because sometimes the hardest things we go through turn into the most important things we learn." On a Friday evening in October, Marcus stood on his small balcony watching the sunset over the Portland skyline, the buildings catching light and throwing it back in shades of gold and amber. He thought about the man he'd been 3 years ago, drowning in a kitchen lit only by failure and desperation. That man felt like someone else now, like a character in a story Marcus had read but not lived. He'd lost years, had missed moments with his children he could never get back, had hurt people who deserved better. But he'd also found something unexpected in the wreckage, himself. Not the man he'd been before addiction, but someone new, someone forged in the fire of recovery and tempered by the hard work of change. He was grateful for that. Grateful even for the pain that had forced him to become this person. "It's not about being perfect," he thought, watching clouds drift across the October sky. "It's about being present. It's about showing up." And Marcus Brennan, 2 years sober, was finally, gratefully showing up. But in the quiet of that evening, one question lingered. Could he keep showing up when life inevitably got harder? Because recovery wasn't just about staying sober when things were going well. It was about what you did when the bottom threatened to fall out again. And that test, Marcus knew, was always just around the corner. The call came on a Tuesday in November, Catherine's voice tight with barely controlled panic. "It's Mom. She had a stroke. They're taking her to Providence St. Vincent." Marcus was at a job site in Happy Valley, but he told the crew to finish without him and drove straight to the hospital. Catherine's mother, Gloria, had been a steady presence through everything, watching the kids during the worst of Marcus's drinking, supporting Catherine through the separation, never judging but never excusing either. She'd been cautiously warm to Marcus in his recovery, watching him the way you'd watch a storm system to see if it would pass or intensify. Now she was in a hospital bed, half her face slack, fighting for a recovery of her own. Catherine was in the waiting room with the kids when Marcus arrived. Lily was crying quietly, and James sat rigid with the kind of shock that paralyzes children when they first encounter mortality. Marcus wrapped them both in his arms without asking permission, and Catherine didn't pull them away. For the next 6 hours, they waited together. Marcus made coffee runs, brought sandwiches no one ate, sat with the kids while Catherine spoke with doctors. When Gloria was finally stable enough for brief visits, Catherine asked Marcus to stay with Lily and James while she went in first. "Tell them Grandma's going to be okay," she said, though her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. The crisis became a strange kind of crucible. Over the following weeks, as Gloria fought through rehabilitation and speech therapy, Marcus and Catherine found themselves partnering in ways they hadn't since before the drinking destroyed their marriage. He drove the kids to school when Catherine needed to be at the hospital early. She called him when she needed someone to talk to at midnight, when the fear got too heavy to carry alone. They shared the load, and in sharing it, remembered why they'd fallen in love in the first place. Because they were good together, because their strengths balanced each other's weaknesses, because some connections run deeper than the damage done to them. One evening in December, after a particularly long day at the hospital, Catherine and Marcus sat in his truck in the Providence parking garage, neither quite ready to drive away yet. "I've been thinking," Catherine said, staring at her hands. "About us, about whether we could try again." Marcus's heart lurched, but he forced himself to stay calm, to not grab at hope too desperately. "I think about it every day," he admitted. "But I also know I broke us, and I don't get to decide when or if we're fixed." Catherine looked at him then, really looked, with eyes that had learned to see past performances to the truth underneath. "You're not the same person who broke us," she said, "and I'm not the same person who let it happen for so long. Maybe that's enough to start from." They didn't move back in together immediately. Instead, they dated, awkward and intentional, like teenagers learning each other for the first time. Dinner at Pok Pok, a movie at the Living Room Theaters, walks along the East Bank Esplanade while the Willamette River flowed dark beside them. They talked about boundaries and expectations, about what Marcus's sobriety meant practically, about how to protect the kids if things went wrong again. "I go to meetings twice a week, and that's not negotiable," Marcus said. "I need that support system, that accountability." Catherine nodded. "And I need you to understand that trust is something you'll be rebuilding for years, maybe forever." They were building something new on the foundation of what they'd lost, and it felt both fragile and surprisingly strong. By spring, they'd integrated their households. Catherine and the kids moved into a larger place in the Woodstock neighborhood, a house with a yard big enough for James to practice pitching and Lily to start a garden. Marcus brought his furniture, his routines, and his empty bottle, which Catherine allowed him to keep on the office shelf after he explained what it meant. "It's your reminder," she said. "I get that." They established new rhythms as a family: Friday game nights, Sunday hikes in Forest Park, Wednesday dinners where everyone shared the best and worst part of their week. The kids tested boundaries, watching to see if Dad would slip, if this version of their father was permanent or temporary. Marcus understood and didn't resent it. He showed up consistently and completely, until the testing gradually faded into acceptance. Gloria recovered enough to move into an assisted living facility in Hillsborough, her speech slurred but improving, her spirit intact. She'd pulled Marcus aside during one visit and said with great effort, "You earned this," gesturing to encompass his family, his second chance. "Don't waste it." Marcus had promised he wouldn't, understanding that he carried not just his own recovery, but the hope of everyone who'd watched him claw his way back from the edge. At night sometimes, Marcus would wake up in the bed he now shared with Catherine and be overcome with gratitude so intense it was almost painful. He'd lost so much, come so close to losing everything, and somehow been given another chance. He didn't take it lightly. He knew that addiction was a lifelong battle, that sobriety was a daily choice, that one moment of weakness could unravel years of work. But he also knew he was stronger than he'd been, surrounded by people who loved him and a purpose bigger than his own comfort. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was still being written, and Marcus Brennan was finally holding the pen. Yet even in this moment of hard-won peace, he understood that the real test of recovery wasn't celebration but mundane persistence. Could he keep choosing sobriety when life returned to ordinary? When the novelty of redemption faded into the routine of simply living? That was the question that would define the rest of his life. Marcus Brennan's story isn't unique, but it is true. Across Portland, across America, across the world, there are people fighting the same battle he fought, drowning in bottles and pills and behaviors that promise escape but deliver only chains. Some will find their way out, others won't. The difference often comes down to a single moment of clarity, one choice to stop running and start fighting, one decision to believe that redemption is possible even when every piece of evidence suggests otherwise. What Marcus learned, what anyone who's walked this path learns, is that recovery isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming present. It's about showing up for the life you've been given, even when that life is broken and messy and nothing like you planned. It's about understanding that love isn't a feeling that happens to you, but an action you choose repeatedly, especially on the days when choosing it is hardest. The empty bottle on his shelf stands as testament to the price of his peace, but also to the possibility of transformation. We are not defined by our worst moments, but by what we do in the moments after, by whether we let failure destroy us or use it as foundation to build something stronger. If you're fighting your own battles with addiction, if you're watching someone you love slowly disappear into their demons, if you've already lost someone to this disease, know this: the path back exists, but it requires courage most people never have to demonstrate. It requires admitting you're broken, asking for help, doing the hard work of healing even when healing feels impossible. It requires patience with yourself and faith that day by day, choice by choice, you can become someone new. Marcus would tell you that the man he is now was built in the ruins of who he used to be, that every day sober is both a victory and a beginning. What will you build from your ruins? And what would your life look like if you stopped running from yourself and started fighting for who you could become? Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this story. If it touched you or made you think about life in a different way, don't keep it just for yourself. Share it with someone who might need to hear this too. And if you truly want to support this channel, please subscribe, turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading what you have to say. And finally, if you really enjoyed it and want to help keep these stories alive, consider buying me a simple coffee on Ko-fi. Even the smallest gesture makes a big difference and helps us bring more stories like this to you. Thank you, and see you in the next one.